This video details a framework for open source clinical trial reporting. It is motivated by the question of whether or not we can report clinical trials using open source software, and if so, what would a solution look like? Welcome to this presentation. My name is Chris Rook, and I'm a consultant statistical programmer. This is part one of an end-to-end framework for clinical trial reporting using open sources. The focus here is on TLF production and validation. Here TLF is an acronym for tables, listings, and figures. A full working prototype with single-click production and validation of TLFs without driver files will be presented. Bundled PDFs and RTFs are included along with user interfaces for CSR and ad hoc reporting. First, we take a step back to compare the direction of our industry with the proposed framework. Our industry is headed towards open source interactive CSRs whereby TLFs will be generated via point-and-click interfaces that allow filtering, changing of populations and subpopulations, etc. A number of questions arise, such as how results are validated and what's the impact of a long-running program or one with errors. Such a system will be object-oriented by nature and require full lifecycle development, starting with the selection of a development methodology. Statistical programmers are typically not application developers, therefore who will develop such systems? Particularly at small or medium-sized companies, and acknowledging that a complete overhaul of existing business practices will be in order. At a practical level, p-value and confidence interval abuse must be prevented, and the system should allow rapid modification to the TLF code for producing the myriad ad hoc and regulatory requests needed during a global submission. Under the proposed framework, the delivery is validated and TLF development is by statistical programmers, similar to existing approaches that use SAS. There are user interfaces for ad hoc reporting, but the front and back ends are separated, allowing for TLFs to be generated using any software. Further, the outputs are formatted to existing industry standards with automated bundling, and the code is easily modifiable for ad hoc reporting. Typically, each TLF is produced by a separate program. Including logic in such programs creates the headache of having large numbers of very similar programs. TLF spec changes will impact many files. Alternatively, driver files can be used that only contain macro or function calls. Since driver files contain no programming logic, they rarely change and require limited or no header maintenance. They also force programmers to put all programming logic into macros or functions which are reusable. A driver file essentially contains metadata about a TLF, such as titles, footnotes, display options, and macro or function calls. If we store this information elsewhere, individual files become unnecessary and can be replaced by a single driver file that accepts a TLF ID, then retrieves the metadata to produce the corresponding output. Using the proposed framework, a delivery is generated by launching a shell file that will prompt the user for a run ID. The metadata are read for this run ID, and all corresponding TLFs are generated. Based on the number of cores available, we can background process a fixed number of TLFs to save time. Once all outputs are generated, post-processors are launched for bundling, bookmarking, and linking. The table of contents is then generated, as is an issue report from scanning log files. We also use the log files to identify all functions invoked for this run, then copy and hyperlink the code. Lastly, the files are zipped for delivery to relevant stakeholders. Metadata for the first two tables is shown above. Table 1.1 is an overall summary of AEs with 3 titles and 4 footnotes that is generated by a call to function makeAE tab. Since no parameters are set, Table 1.1 will use the function's default arguments. Metadata for Table 1.2 includes an updated first title, then instructions to inherit all other titles and footnotes from Table 1.1. Table 1.2 is generated with a call to the same function, but the subset parameter is updated to include only serious AEs. When launched, the script file will read this metadata and convert it to a set of instructions for generating each TLF. The first N TLFs are launched concurrently in separate threads by invoking the parameterized driver file, which is written in R Markdown. Formatting instructions such as font type and size, along with page size, orientation, and margins are set in the generic R Markdown driver file, thus will be applied consistently across TLFs. We will now generate some data, then launch the shell file, pause while it runs, and review the results. Currently, we have no data. This R program will create completely synthetic ADSL, ADAE, ADLB, ADVS, and ADTTE datasets as both RDS and XBT files. ADSL is created first by converting a list of subjects to a data frame and then adding required variables. ADAE is made by creating a data frame of AEs and cross-joining it with ADSL. ADLB, ADVS, and ADTTE are made by creating separate data frames of visits and parameters and cross-joining both with ADSL. All datasets except ADSL will have records filtered out according to a rule because not all subjects have complete data. All TLFs in this delivery are zipped into a single file, which is extracted. To navigate the delivery, we open the table of contents. Tables, listings, and figures are in separate sections. This is an HTML widget that has controls for selecting the number of rows to display per page as well as for fast navigation. It is generated using R. Below the table are links to the listings that support this table, and below that is a link back to the table of contents as well as links to several related files. The cell index is generated using R. This PDF file is generated using Python. The data table is generated using R. The text file is generated using R. The XBT file is generated using R. The docx file is generated using Python. The RTF file is generated using R. This PDF file is generated using R. The RTF table is generated using R. There are also links to the driver file and function that were invoked to create this table. Note that the last footnote also indicates the function that was invoked to create this table. Lastly, there is a link to the log file which will indicate whether or not this table was generated with errors. Listings are also generated as HTML widgets and include controls and links similar to the tables, except that there are no source files or cell indices. Figures are generated as HTML files and contain a link back to the table of contents as well as links to several related files. This PDF file is generated using Python. The docx file is generated using Python. The RTF file is generated using R. This PDF file is generated using R. The RTF table is generated using R. The XPT file is generated using R. The interactive plot is generated using R. The PNG and JPEG graphics files are generated using R. There are also links to the generic driver file and function that were invoked to create this figure. Note that the last footnote also indicates the function that was invoked to create this figure. Lastly, there is a link to the log file which will indicate whether or not this figure was generated with errors. The table of contents is generated as an HTML file using R. Similar to TLFs, there are links to various related files. Additionally, there are links to a bundled PDF file generated using Python that is bookmarked and hyperlinked, a bundled RTF file generated using R that is hyperlinked, an overall log check report covering all TLFs in this run, and the script file that was launched to generate all TLFs in this run. Any TLF generated previously can also be produced with the user interface. This shiny app allows TLF consumers to view the CSR outputs between deliveries when Atom datasets are refreshed. Caution is in order as these TLFs will not have been validated. We can select an output, view the metadata, and produce the TLF. All links work as before, and there is an additional link to download the entire package as a zip file for the unvalidated output. Additionally, we can reuse the CSR code to produce ad hoc requests by updating the TLF metadata. This shiny app allows the user to update metadata and produce the resulting TLF. Since filters are written as code statements, limited knowledge of our syntax is required for non-trivial updates. A TLF user interface can also be generated using Python, demonstrating that the front and back ends are independent. As with the shiny CSR app, this Python interface can be used to produce CSR TLFs on demand between major deliverables when Atom datasets are updated. All links work as before, except that Jupyter Notebook Security requires right-clicking links and selecting options before they will display. To avoid this, buttons have been added for faster navigation. Lastly, the same cautionary note applies. If generated on updated Atom datasets, these outputs are unvalidated. We can also build an ad hoc generator using Python. Similar to the RShiny ad hoc generator, this interface allows the user to update TLF metadata and produce new outputs. Unlike the Shiny app, which simply provided a metadata editor, this version is more user-friendly and attempts to avoid knowledge of programming syntax. As with RShiny, a Jupyter notebook hosting Python widgets is web-based. Validation of the TLF delivery will follow existing industry standards and include visual inspection of output files, double programming and comparison of the TLF data, and reproduction of figures. It will be conducted in Python and organized within a Jupyter notebook. Running the notebook will perform the validation and produce status reports. The saved notebook is validation proof in a single file. We will now run and review the validation notebook. The validation notebook begins with a hyperlinked table of contents for fast navigation. It contains a section for validation of each output, followed by validation status reports. It ends with a visual inspection of the bundled PDF and RTF files. Validation of tables and listings will include 4 sections: visual inspection of the output, visual inspection of the output dataset, a function call to reproduce the output dataset. This uses the Python QC code, and a comparison of the output and QC datasets. Visual inspection of the TLF includes checking the related files. We can either use the embedded links or the screen controls. Validation of figures will include 5 sections: visual inspection of the output, visual inspection of the output dataset, a function call to reproduce the output dataset. This uses the Python QC code, a comparison of the QC and output datasets, and reproduction of the figure in Python for visual inspection. To run all QC code, we navigate to the top and run all cells below. As the code runs, data is being collected on the status of each output. By scrolling through the notebook, we will show that all TLFs pass QC. This is evident from the green check marks. Red X's are displayed when an output fails validation. Status reports in the form of a table, a listing, and a figure are produced. To display the reports when all TLFs do not pass QC, we will intentionally fail some outputs first. This concludes part 1 of a framework for end-to-end clinical trial reporting using open sources. We have presented a full working prototype for TLF production and validation, including user interfaces for ad hoc reporting. My LinkedIn and email addresses are shown below. Feel free to contact me with any questions and/or concerns. Thank you for watching.